The North Oakland Community Coalition is a nonprofit organization located in Lake Orion, serving the communities of Lake Orion and Oxford, Michigan. The purpose of our organization is to support the youth in our community, to reduce youth substance use and implement mental wellness initiatives that build healthier, goal-driven youth.
So the Coalition provides education, different programming and resources for youth and actually for our entire community, with a focus on youth substance use, alcohol abuse, and mental health. They actually start with our youth at a young age. They get involved and they talk about all of these topics that are sometimes hard to talk about, and they make it easier for them to talk about and give them the vocabulary to deal with it when it comes up in their life.
The NOCC is not a staff. It's not this office. Our coalition is actually all of our community members, our parents, our youth, all of the sectors in our community working together on the goals of youth prevention.
So with my position with the Sheriff's Department and being inside the schools, I recognize the need with our students for substance abuse education, mental health education, which I'm super excited that NOCC is now taking that pathway.
Our mental health initiatives at NOCC started because we recognized that there is a need in our community for people to be able to not only recognize the mental health challenges that are occurring, but find the help and assistance through resources that are offered in the community that they need. To meet these needs, we offer mental health education trainings for teens, parents, and senior citizens. We know that one of the best ways to impact the youth is to give them a voice. Our Youth Action Board is involved in many of our prevention programs throughout our schools and our community.
So Youth Action Board is a student-led drug and alcohol prevention club. We try to focus on mental health issues and how we can try to help others that are struggling with these problems.
My favorite part of being Youth Action Board is in the summer. I get to be a counselor at Level Up Camp, and Level Up Camp is a camp where incoming 6th graders learn life skills and skills that'll be helpful in middle school.
I think we bring a different perspective. Since we are students, we kind of see firsthand about these issues and when they're happening, more than adults. And since the NOCC is an adult-led program, it's really good to have the student perspective to be addressing these issues.
The Youth Action Board helps NOCC figure out where to attack these mental health problems and substance abuse problems, because it's like the connector between the two worlds.
Guys. Oh, thank you. I'm going to tell a funny story. The last time that I was here, standing in this place, I was auditioning to give the graduation speech. And I didn't get it, but look at me now. Yeah, it's been 23 years since I was here, so you can do the math if you want, but don't. But I'm so excited. I love and miss Lake Orion so much. My parents are still here, so I'm here all the time. But my family and I have a daughter who is 5, she's in kindergarten, and a son who's 10, he's in 5th grade, and we're up in Walled Lake. So a lot of what I do is within the Walled Lake Consolidated School District, and then my private practice that I'm now at, I was at Henry Ford as well and did both. Now I'm just in private practice in commerce, in addition to running the nonprofit that myself and a colleague started. So we'll talk a little bit about that here and there, but if it's okay with you guys, I thought I would start with something fun. Is that okay? Okay. This may be a little bit of a different talk than you're expecting from a psychologist, but I'm sort of hoping that will be a good time and we'll have a lot of fun. So I'm going to start with, we're going to have like a little test. It's not a real test, but I have prizes, so we'll go with it. So I have a couple of different, I want to like quiz you guys on what you already know about mental health, right? And then my lovely assistant, Sarah, is going to be my prize giver. Okay, so who has a guess? It's okay if you're wrong. It's okay to be wrong. But who has a guess What is the statistic? 1 in what? 1 in how many kids currently have a mental health disorder, illness, challenge? What do you think? Anyone have a guess? What's your guess? Not 1 in 4. Who said 1 in 5? Yes, 1 in 5, right? Think about that. Like, we could even count out, right? 1 in 5. So think of yourself and 5 other people, or think of 5 kids you know, 1 of them, right? I have a mental illness. Crazy, right? Not so crazy. It is very, very common. Very honestly, from a long history of family that has mental illness. And so, right, it is absolutely something that I'm passionate about because it's treatable, number 1. Number 2, it's so, so common. So I'm excited to share some of those facts with you guys. But I have a prize for you. You get to pick. So another fun fact about me is that when we started our nonprofit, we were completely self-funded. We still are completely self-funded, but we had to have a way to, like, you know, hustle and make money to go out in the community and do the stuff. So we started a mental health clothing brand. So I brought some of those pieces for you guys because I thought it would be fun. But I'm gonna let you pick which one you want. How about that? Okay. So I have 3. This one says it's okay to be okay. This one, I'm gonna save my favorite for the last. This one says be kind to your mind and society. And then this one is my favorite. Your anxiety's lying to you. You can tell which one I like. Your choice. Which one? Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. Next one. Let's see. Ooh. Does anyone know the second leading cause of death among children 6 to 17? Ooh, who said that? Raise your hand. Did you say that? Do you want to say it again? Suicide? Yes. 100%. You're the winner. Yes. Isn't that crazy? That's like not okay. The second leading cause, that's not okay, right? And when we look at statistics, like with Oakland County or Wayne County, you know, we see that we're not great. We're not great. And so it's so awesome that we have organizations like NOCC, you know, within each community that is doing this kind of work, and kids that are also passionate, and they are up and coming leaders also. And I think that's just fantastic because eventually it'll be you guys and you'll be chilling out up here and stuff. But you get a pick. So what are you thinking? Are we going with it's okay to not be okay, or are we going to do the anxiety is lying detector? My favorite. Awesome. Okay, last one. All right. Ooh, who knows? So psychologists love to do research, right? And so they have identified an age where it's like the point where people have, if they're going to develop a mental illness, this is the age that they will most commonly, you know, it will most commonly be present. That's when you'll really, this is when it sort of really forms. Does anyone know the age?
15.
14. Who said 14? 14. 14. So by the age of, by process of elimination, you're welcome. No problem. So by the age of 14, right? Like, that is startling. So it's incredible that you guys are here because you're the parents who are here going and doing the parenting things, extra bonus points, credit for you guys. A lot of parents don't or aren't hooked into these sorts of things. And so, you know, we have a long way to go, but I'm hoping that we can sort of chat today. I'll do one of the breakout sessions, so that'll be really fun too. But what I thought I'd do is give you guys sort of like an overview of mental health as I see it. And as I go through, I'll be sort of talking about some of the maybe approaches that I take or tools that I have that I use with the teens or the young adults or the kids that I see. But I want you to think of it like a buffet. Right? Like, you know, when you go to a buffet, you're just going to pick what you like and what will work for you, right? If you don't like, you know, roast beef, don't take it. So it's like a buffet. Some of the things will fit and you'll say, I could see that working. I'm going to try that one out. And some won't. And that's okay, right? Every kid is so different. So it's a lot of trial and error. And if you're a parent, you know that is very true. So as we go through some of this stuff, just keep that in mind. To start, though, I wanted to give you guys sort of an idea of what children's mental health, what does that even mean? Like, what am I talking about when I say children's mental health? And so what I'm talking about is sort of different developmental stages that children go through. And as they go through those stages, there are some, you know, feelings, emotions, experiences, behaviors that are totally normal, right? Like we should expect these things based on where they are developmentally. And some of them, maybe they become more of a problem, right? And that's when we might have to seek help or something like that, or come see someone like me. So we're gonna kind of talk about the difference between those two. But the thing that I think would be good to start with, I want you guys to imagine, right, when your kids were teeny tiny, right? The only way they could communicate with you was what? Crying a lot, right? Like you knew if they had an opinion about something because you know, or if they needed a thing, yes. And as they develop, right, they gain the ability to speak. What's crazy, I think, is that kids learn to understand language before they learn to speak it. Imagine that I'm having this conversation with you and you can't answer any of my questions, right? And you know, that would be completely frustrating. So we see that in kids. That is totally normal as they develop. Sometimes with really kind of off the charts, like our outlier kids, right? Kids who are really developmentally just off the charts. They're just, you know, really bright. These are like the gifted kiddos. Sometimes we see even more issues in those kids because they are developing quicker in one area and not, you know, normal run-of-the-mill in another area, so we have a bigger gap, right? So imagine that. Imagine you really understand this language and you know what you want to say, but your body just ain't, it's not happening because you're still, you know, 6 months old. So, right? So in gifted children, we actually see it even greater. So we'll kind of talk about those little differences as we go along, but when we talk about development in kids, something that's really, I think, good to keep in mind is that, you know, from like 0 to 5, you have all the little mile markers. It's like, oh, Zane learned to, he rolled, my son's name's Zane, Zane rolled over, you know, and you're like so excited about each thing. Oh, they learned to walk and they learned to use the potty, and it's like all the things. And it feels like it's happening really fast, right? Like the development. So what's wild is that kind of development continues until they're 23. It happens just as quick and sometimes even quicker in different ways, but it's not happening in the same ways that they did when they were younger, right? So like we were seeing when they walked and they talked and they do all those things, but cognitively, they're still developing at a very rapid pace when they hit that, you know, middle school mark and the high school mark. These are developing brains. So that's the thing we're gonna keep in our minds. What's really cool about that is that it's like not too late, right? So their brains will not fully form until they're closer to 23 to 25. So I want you guys to imagine back when you were like 17, right? I was here, hot mess. But I think back to some of the stuff I did and I'm like, why? Like there was no logic. It's because my brain was not fully formed. Clearly not fully formed. So all of us probably have a situation where we could relate to that, right? Like, ooh, the things I, you know, did as a kid, like that wasn't very wise. I don't want my kids to do that, right? But it makes sense because their brains are so different. A really good example of this is the way that the emotional brain and the logic part of the brain develops. So here's another one where you get a discrepancy. So you'll have that emotional side of the brain fully developed by, it's like right around like adolescence. So it's like 11, 12, fully developed. The problem here is the front part of the brain, the one that has to like make decisions and know how to pay bills and delay gratification and all that, that one's not coming until the 20s. So now it's like giving a toddler the keys to your car. Like it's not a good idea. So we have to keep that in mind when we're thinking about our own child's mental health, right? Sometimes I think that is a relief for me because I'm like, okay, all right, you know, she's doing whatever it is she's doing. This is not great. This is frustrating. Even for a therapist, right? My kids are certainly not perfect. I don't pretend that they are. They might even have a harder time because their mom's a therapist. But they, you know, if that's what's happening, if I remind myself, this is a person with a fully formed brain that is not yet developed. then it kind of gets us off the hook a little bit. And it gives us sort of like that extra little, like it's not too late kind of thing. Like we can always make changes in how we parent, what our relationships with our kids are like. Like it is never, ever, ever too late. So again, extra points for you guys for being here and like learning some little things. My hope is that maybe if there's just even like one or two things that you leave and you're like, all right, that one stuck with me, I'm gonna try that, then I'm gonna say that that's like a success. We'll count that as a success. So don't go home and try to like redo everything about how you interact with your kids or do discipline, or you don't have to go crazy. Even just one little thing, one little alteration sometimes can really make a difference. And if it's one little alteration that makes things less stressful for us as parents, it's an extra bonus. So we want to go for those ones first. So kind of keep an eye out for those, because again, if we're the ones driving the bus, right? Like we want to be as well taken care of as possible, because right, everyone else on the bus is also affected. So you guys probably hear that a lot with self-care, and you'll hear that again tonight as we're talking. But back to the brain, right? So, okay, so now we've got these kids and their brains aren't fully developed, but they're having to make really big choices, right? Like they're coming up against things like substances and, relationships. And that's another really good one, right? Remember, like your first love. Oh, it was here. I could tell you the exact hallway I cried in. My science teacher was Mr. Miles. Is he still teaching? Yeah. Oh, sweetest man. I sat next to the guy, and so he moved me, and he was like, you can go out to the hallway. So he let me go out with a friend in the hallway. So sweet, but I could tell you exactly where it was. It's like ingrained in my mind. We all probably have those things, because that emotional part of the brain runs the show most of the time. You know how kids, for us, it's like, oh my gosh, why are you so dramatic? Like, what in the world? This is not the end of the world. I even find myself saying that. But to a child with that brain that's not developed, it feels like the end of the world. And they don't have that part of the brain that lets them see that, like, it's gonna be okay. Like, it's not the end of the world. Like, I can get through this, or problem solve, or, use a coping, like that is off the table, not there. So again, that's a really important thing to know as well. Kids' behavior as they get older, it tells us a lot of things. Just like it did when they were younger and they got frustrated because they couldn't speak, even though they knew what they wanted to say or what they wanted to, what they needed from you. So those sort of differences and those gaps still happen. We see it a lot when kids are under stress. So the thing that I know that unites all of us as parents is that we all went through the experience of 2020, right? Virtual learning, all the things. That was like probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I am not a teacher or instructor, and I could never, ever, ever do it in a million zillion years. But that was stressful, not just for us, but was it stressful for kids, right? How many people's kids? Mine struggled. And he's like a bright kid, but it was just not a good time. So all of these kids have had different kind of stressors. That's an example of one that they've all had. But all kids have different things, right, in their lives that they deal with. And yet they don't have all of the skills yet to know how to navigate those things. So as they're moving forward, right, we might see different behaviors that start popping up, and we're like, ugh. Why? Or we're running to, getting frustrated and, go to your room or whatever it is. But I think it's good, keep that in the back of our mind, right? Like their behavior is communicating something to us. So we're gonna help you decode it a little bit, right, as we go along, but it's just important to know that they still don't have that ability to communicate their emotions, because again, there's that detachment between that emotional brain and the logical brain. So imagine, as like a side note, therapy with teenagers is very challenging because of that, right? They're like adults. You guys are like adults already, right? Doing adult things, making adult decisions. You guys are juniors and a senior, right? Like you're gonna have to make really big decisions and your brain's still developing. So we gotta give you a break. We're gonna give you a break. We'll do a really cool panel with them later that I hope you guys will stick around for, because it's gonna be really, really neat, but we'll kind of focus on that a little bit when we get there. So they're making all of these big decisions, all these behaviors are coming up. Let me grab I have an example here. So at some points, we might run into a situation where we're like, is this normal? Like, have you ever thought that? Like, is this normal? Like, is this too much? We're so close to the situation that it would be very difficult for us to tell, right? even for me, like we are way too close. It's like the, you know, a Monet painting where you're right up close to it and you see nothing. It looks like a blob of paint, but you get further away. It's like, oh, okay, right? So sometimes we need a little help, right? So maybe go to a friend and say, is your kid, do they, you know, right? We compare notes, or maybe we ask a physician, that sort of thing. All of those things are great. That's all wonderful. That's usually most of the way, right? We get our info about like what's normal, what's not, or the internet, right? Like going like, oh, is this developmentally okay? For me, I kind of streamline the way that I make that, you know, that decision. And that is, if kiddos are having an issue that is causing them stress, causing you stress, and we don't have yet a solution for it, and it's continuing on and on and on, it's a good time to get an outside resource. Right? We'll talk about specific symptoms of things like anxiety and depression in the younger kids and then the teens. But just know that there is not a wrong time to go and seek the help of a therapist. I can't tell you how many parents that I see that might even just come in for like one time to like brainstorm. We don't even see their kid. It's just, we're just brainstorming. Like, okay, like what's kind of going on? You know, sort of like if you went to a personal trainer and they give you like, you know, here's the sorts of the things that you need to do, and then you don't need to see them. You just do the workout and it's great, right? So ideally. So that's the sort of thing also that it's just good to know. I didn't know that as a parent, that that's a thing you could do. It's a thing you can do. But also community organizations like NOCC and, you know, the different ones that we have here in Lake Orion also make those kinds of things available. So know that those also exist. But the majority of the time, you're not going to need to do that. Most kids, the challenges that you guys are having, right? Like 1 in 5 is probably going to need, we're going to need, you know, we're going to outsource some of that and we're going to get brainstorming. But that other 4, it's probably things that you guys can handle and manage with skills and things that you pick up at things like, you know, events at the high school. So keep that in mind also, that there's no wrong time to seek help. I don't think there's any certain point. Some of the red flags, though, that I look for across the lifespan of young kids, again, like I said, are symptoms or things that are continuing behaviors that are concerning, that are happening in more than one area of life. So I'll give you a good example. One area, so if your kiddo is coming home and they are a terror, but at school they're perfect angels. That's my 5-year-old. The teacher, if I would tell her, if I took a video of this child, I mean, she's got a very strong voice. We need strong women, so I'm gonna, you know, we'll deal with it. But they would be shocked. That's a good thing. So they're comfortable enough, right, to like let it all out for you, but they're holding it together at school. I don't worry about that as much. If we see it all over the board, now I have a concern. Now that's telling me, okay, there's a gap between what my kid is dealing with and where their ability is developmentally or just, you know, whatever, where they're at in their ability to handle it, and there's a gap. So there are things that exist in this gap that if they are happening, those are concerning. So things like self-harm, right? I spend a long time working with teens who self-harm, and it's a very interesting, complex area of psychology, right? Because again, we're dealing with the gap. So something that can exist in the gap when a kid is dealing with something that they don't know how to handle, right? Or they're not developmentally able, like trauma, things that like aren't in our file cabinet of what a typical, you know, experience in life for a kid. You know, when something is happening, maybe that might set the bar higher. But all kids are different. So all kids have a little bit of a gap going along because of the brain thing. But something like self-harm might be a way that a kid tries to cope. Remember, their brain's not developed, so they're not gonna pick good ways. They're just gonna pick ways, right? And if they like hear about it or they learn about it, they're gonna be like, oh, try that, maybe that'll work, right? Substance use, that's another one. Different kinds of like acting out behavior, that kind of stuff too, is another way that they might try, right? Like to bridge that gap. They're not gonna make the right choice necessarily because again, they don't have that piece of their brain yet. So when we're looking out for those things, know that that is what we're dealing with. If we're seeing some of those more troubling behaviors, school refusals, another one, really high anxiety in kids can actually look like irritability and anger, more often than not, when I see angry kids, I think of it as like the outside of the onion, right? You know how you peel the onion and there are layers? So always I'm thinking, all right, whatever the issue is they're coming in for, that is the outside layer, and there's something inside there, right? So every time with anger, there's something else in there, and usually there's a depression or there's an anxiety component. If the anger is like persistent, and again, in all different areas of life. Okay, so those are some of the things that we really, really look for. And again, those are things that someone like a therapist or someone like me could help navigate. Obviously, when kids are younger, therapy and parent intervention and that kind of thing looks a lot different because, again, their brains, right? So maybe we do lots of play therapy or interaction with parents. And as they get older, we can do different kind of modalities and things with parents, and then also with kids too. Again, the goal to just get that gap a little bit less. So the thing that also helps make that gap less is coping skills. So when I do my breakout, I'm going to talk a lot about some of those things, so I won't get into it too much. But this is where we can kind of do our best work as parents, right? We have the fully developed brain. So all of us can probably think of like the top 3 things that you do if it was a really rough day and you go home and you're just like, I have had it. Like 3 things that we might do to just chill out, to like get back. Just take, whatever it is we need. Maybe it's like, I'm going to bed early, I'm going to take a shower, I'm going to listen to true crime podcasts. That's what I do. Or, like whatever is your thing. We have things that have worked for us. Kids don't have that yet. But it's important for them to see that adults do have those things. It's modeling, right? You guys have probably heard this a lot. Your kids are going to pick up way more about what you do than what you're saying. Right? This is the least powerful tool you have. Your voice, least powerful tool. Isn't that a bummer? Because like I want to just lecture you and you get it and like, come on, like get with the program. No, not at all, not at all. And more times than not, it creates this power struggle, right? And now we got another problem. They're not focusing on the problem, they're focusing on how mad they are at you and what got taken away or whatever it is. So, that's another thing that we have to be mindful of. How are we responding to what they're doing, right? Or how they're acting, or how are we modeling how we want them to handle stuff, and making a point of saying like, hey, I am just really X, Y, or Z. I need, A, B, C right now, and just, we're talking to ourselves. They may or may, they're gonna hear it. But again, we don't have to do anything more than just present an example. That's it. Because they look to us. We notice it more when they're real young. When kids learn to walk and they kind of like walk away from mom or dad and then they look back and right? Like it's secure attachment. They're cool, they're getting adventurous, but like they want to make sure mom and dad's right there. They are still looking to you even when they're 17 and 18. Like, am I okay in the world? Like am I good? Like, am I like okay? Like they don't know yet. They're with peers and they're looking at their peers to say like, okay, what are they doing? What's going on? Like, am I okay? Am I acceptable? Am I good enough? Am I lovable? Right? And if our behaviors don't say that to them, right? It doesn't matter if our words do, but if our behaviors don't, then we get problems. So I think that's another thing that parents do unintentionally, totally unintentionally, right? Because if I go to my spouse and I, say like, I really care about you or whatever, it's a very different experience than with my kid. My kid might really like that, but if I'm not showing it in any way, shape, or form, it doesn't really give us the benefit of it. So that's another really important thing to kind of keep in mind. I have a story. I want to make sure I'm not missing any of my little things here. So I have a story about the way that the world looks different to kids. And my poor son, it's his story, and he's only 10, so he's not embarrassed by it yet, but he eventually will be because I tell it out all the time. But kids experience the world very different than we do, right? Walking in here today was very different as an adult than it was when I was a kid. It felt different. It was like I just looked different. Everything is smaller or whatever it is. Like if you go back to elementary school, the world looks different, right? Christmas time, what are you excited for? Santa's coming. I lost a tooth. Tooth fairy's coming, right? Like all of these things. The world is magical, right? It's very different for an adult. Right? We're walking in and we're thinking about way different things than kids are. They perceive things differently, right? And it's different as they kind of go along their lifespan as well. So my son was 5, and this is an example that even though he was 5, and it's an example for 5-year-olds. This is all kids. This is like just a really, I think, it could apply to anybody. But he had to get tubes, right? Anyone's kids have to get tubes in their ears, the whole deal, good times, yeah. So my son, he gets the tubes, it's like all good, you know. He comes by mental illness honestly, right? I have OCD. I've had it since I was in middle school. It's manageable. It's a thing that you can deal with. So when I start seeing the things in my son, I'm like, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Zane. But we start seeing these little things. So he is just really upset about a lot of things, and he doesn't really know why sometimes. So he goes through and he gets the tubes, and they're trying to, so you know when they put them under, they have these little stickers that they stick like the heart monitors and stuff to. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? It looks kind of like a button. So he had those on, and he was kind of coming out of sedation, and he was like off the chains, like trying to take out the doctor. They're like, we're just gonna let him chill out. Mom, you can take care of that when you get home. I was like, yes, let's go that route. I don't want to stress him out even more. So we get home, and you know, he comes out of whatever, and he's getting better, and I'm like, okay, well we can take those off now. You would have thought I said to him, I'm going to electrocute you, child. Like, it was as if I was telling him that I was gonna throw him off the roof. It was, and I'm like, oh my God, why? It's, you know, like they put them on when you're sleeping, we could just take them right off. It's not a big deal. Like I can just take, you know, rubbing alcohol and it'll be cool. Those things stayed on for 1 month. Despite the bath and the everything. I snuck in when he was sleeping to try to, I did everything, and I'm like, what? He was like defending them like nobody's business. He didn't want you to look at him. He didn't want you to touch him. Nothing. And I'm like, what in the world? Like, so I'm talking with my colleagues and stuff, and they're like, what does he think is going to happen when you take him off? And I'm like, I never thought that. But I don't know what he thinks. Like, I would think, what? You get it off and it's done. You throw it away, right? So I went home and I was like, Zane, do you have a thought about like what will happen when you take those off? And he's like, well, you told me that they use the blood pressure thing and they put the wires there, right? And I was like, yeah. He's like, well, the wires are in my body. I don't want them to come out. He thought the wires were in his body and that the stickers were the things that were holding them in. So he thought by taking off the stickers that I would be pulling out wires from his body. And I was like, oh my God, Zane, I'm so sorry. Like, I would never. And I did all the things before the surgery, right? We went to Henry Ford Bloomfield, and we like walked around, and we met the doctor, all the things. Nope, totally didn't see that one coming. But I think, again, the way the world looks to a kid is very different, right? Do you guys remember taking your driver's training test, right? Courtesy driving school, yeah. I did it in the parking lot over M24, good times, right? Was that the scariest thing you had ever done to that point? I did not sleep, right? Some kids breeze through it. Nope. It would not be an issue now. I'd be like, okay, this is a little annoying, but like this is an issue. But the world looks very different, right? So we have to kind of keep that in mind too sometimes when we're asking our kids to do things or cope in certain ways, right? They're not quite there yet. So we're off the hook a little bit, and also it allows us to have a more realistic expectation for what we're going to expect from them. So I think that's really powerful, right? The biggest thing, so one thing that was really kind of neat when I did work at Henry Ford, I got to work in sports medicine. So we got to see like the ex-Lions players who had like all of these wild head injuries, right? And so they come to behavioral health and, you know, they see a clinician there. So I got to be one of those clinicians. So it was like giant football players and like little Nikki. I'm actually 5 foot, but I wear heels, so I pretend that I'm a little taller. But so I would have these guys, and they would come in, and it was an incredible experience. But I had one that I had worked with, and he actually is a speaker as well, and he tells this story about the number one thing that will make kids successful. And so I think it's so valuable to learn. But so again, psychology tells the story of psychologists doing all this research, and they looked at the outliers. They looked at the kids that are like off the charts, right? Because like, who doesn't want their kid to be off the charts, right? The surgeon, whatever it is, right? So they looked at those kids and they said, what is different about those kids compared to like everybody else, or the kids on the really low end, right? It wasn't where they grew up. It wasn't who their parents were. It wasn't how much money their parents made. It wasn't who their friends were. It wasn't what schools they went to. Does anyone know what it was?
When they were born?
No.
Their relationships?
No. Isn't this wild? Those are all factors, for sure, and great guesses. Resilience. So a kid's ability to be resilient was the key. That is the key, right? So we'll talk, you guys will hear in a lot of the breakout sessions about resiliency, right? And how important it is to build that into our kids. So mental health hinges a lot on a kid's ability to be resilient. A lot of things happen, right? Use the example of when they're really tiny. When they're learning to walk, what happens? Fall all over the place. They're like giant heads with little tiny bodies and they're just wobbling everywhere, right? But we know, we expect that, right? So like maybe we help them at first and then as they get a little confident, then we kind of let them go, right? Do you remember when your kid took their first steps? I totally remember. I actually think he took his first steps at daycare and they didn't want to break it to me. So like he came home and he did it, but I pretend that like I saw the first steps. So what was the look on their face? So proud. They did it themselves. If we had run in there every time and scooped them up, right, what's going to happen? A couple things are going to happen. And think about this on a bigger scale with even teenagers, right? If we're constantly either worried that they won't be able to handle something, worried that they won't do the homework if we don't remind them, or worried about, any of these things, and we're trying to take the extra steps, what it says to a kid is, I don't think you can do it. I think you need me. And we don't want them to think that. I want you to go in the world. I want to be out at some point. We can be cool. Like we want them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, right? So unintentionally, we're communicating this to them when we don't give them the opportunity to fail. Ugh. Is that the worst thing ever? Like watching your kids struggle and have real life consequences? It's awful. It's terrible. It will keep every single one of us up at night, knowing that they're going to make a choice and it probably is going to be bad. But didn't we as kids learn way more from those than we did the ones that were like the great ones? I don't remember any of the good choices I made. I mean, like I could really think, but like, man, like the bad ones, I learned a whole lot, especially the ones that my parents made me. They allowed me to experience the real life consequence. The cool part is we don't have to be the bad guy as a parent. Life can be the bad guy. And we can just be the supportive, I hate when that happens, right? Come in with the empathy. We can help them a little bit, guide them, but allow them to experience what life is going to be like. The risks when they're really young like this, under 18, they're not huge, right? It's not like they're going to, they don't have a mortgage yet. They're like not out in the world, doing all these big things. They don't have this, a career that if they don't get up on time to go to, like no one's going to call you and remind you, like you got to get up, you got to be, or you have a deadline, don't forget. Like they don't do that. So we want to make sure they're ready for that by practicing before we even get there. So resiliency is huge. Another cool part about it is it lets us off the hook a little bit. Yeah.
You might get into this later, but
Yeah.
how do you measure resiliency?
So every single kid is going to be so different. Here's a good thing to know though. If your kid is struggling in any area, or there's like a behavior, like we'll use something like homework. We'll use that one, right? That's a good one. So either not doing their homework, putting it off, whatever. If they're continuing to experience, if you allow them to experience the consequences and they're still not getting it, right? Like they have consequences at school if they don't do their homework, right? Social consequences, academic consequences, all of that. If it's more important to us than it is to them, it's not going to work. So we allow them to experience the consequence. If it continues to happen, it's a sign that there's something there, that there's a gap. There's a gap in their ability. And that's when we can rush in rather than continuing to really hound on them and say maybe this is that thing that lady talked about where maybe your brain is just not there yet. Maybe you need you need a little bit more support there than in other areas. We're going to see this. Even really bright kids, again, gifted children are so interesting because they will struggle with things that surprise us, right? It looks behavioral, but no, they're just struggling because other areas have overdeveloped, but these other things are just right on track normal. So we have to keep that in mind for them, that it may be a sign that there is an issue there, whether it's, again, Zane, he couldn't, he didn't understand. There was an understanding issue. Or maybe it's an executive functioning issue, right? Being able to remember A, B, C, D, do them in those orders, that's executive functioning. That also develops at different times. So we kind of have to look at our kids, kind of, step back and just observe them. Like, what happens in their natural habitat when we're not a part of it necessarily? We're not saying anything, we're not reminding, we're not doing anything else. Where's their baseline? And then we can do, some good interventions. Sometimes it's educational, right? I had a math deficit, and I was in special education for math all the way through. Clearly picked a job that doesn't require math, because it's not the thing that I'm gonna do. Literally, it's like being dyslexic, right? But for numbers, like, think of it that way. So it was an issue that I got punished for a lot because I was avoiding the homework. Why? Because I literally could not compute, right? I needed intervention. And that's when finally I had this wonderful teacher at Walden Middle School who was like, you have a bright kid, but there is something there that is not matching up. It doesn't match with, like, one of these things is not the same. That was not the same. So, they were able to give the intervention there. So sometimes we have to get a little creative, right? Ask a trusted friend, right? Or a pediatrician, something like that, to help us break it down. And again, therapists are a good resource for that too. So know that is something that you can utilize. The thing that I think is most powerful, and the thing that I want to send you guys into your breakout sessions with, is that you have so much more influence than you think you do. Even if you've got teenagers and, like, it's gonna happen to me and I know it will and I can't wait. It's hard, right? It's so hard. I'm not excited. But they don't look like they like you. They don't sometimes, right? They'll say, I don't like you, right? And they look awful and they're acting ugly and all these things. All of that is a facade, right? They're trying to just try to act and do and whatever, right? It's the outside of the onion, but underneath there, they still need all the other things that we're really good at providing. The I love yous, the hugs, the reinforcement, the hey, like, what's going on, noticed X, Y, or Z, Tell me about Fortnite. I learned a lot about Fortnite because my son likes Fortnite, right? I don't care anything about Fortnite. I think I don't have the attention for it, but I learned about it because it was something he was interested in. So those sorts of things. We have way more power than we think we do, and it isn't anything above the moon, right? I don't want you guys to feel like you've got, have to do all these things. They are these individuals who exist, and we get to be here, and we're gonna guide them a little bit here and there, but don't ever discount the fact that all the things you say, and especially your actions, have an impact. So we really have to be careful. I'll notice that sometimes with myself. If my attitude when I come home is crummy, we have a crummy evening. I sometimes I might come home and I'll be like, I had a really rough day. I need to go chill out for 20 minutes and I'll go do my thing and then I come back and I'm back in the game. I can't expect more from them than I'm willing to put out myself. So if it's something really awful that we are asking of them, I'm gonna hype it up and I'm trying to make it as fun as possible, right? Again, our attitude really coming into something. And they can read us. They're like little detectives, right? Like one little micro expression and they're like, why are you mad? Why did you look at me like that? Whatever it is, right? Like they really do. So we really just have to be mindful of those things. But you guys are doing way more probably than you think you are that is benefiting your kiddos. And then just taking, one or two of these little things and, putting those to work sometimes can be really the game changer. So I want to send you into your breakouts with that thought of how powerful we are and how we're going to pick and choose. And we'll kind of go from there.